So Murad's going to give his perspective on what it takes to be a thought leader, obviously from a national title. So Murad, we'll hand over to you.
So my name is Murad Ahmed. I'm the technology reporter for the Times, we've been covering a lot of cybercrime and IT security stories increasingly over the last few years, particularly in the 5 years that I've been covering the subject for the Times. If we can go to the first slide. I thought to start with, let's go with the kind of the idea behind this webinar. What is thought leadership? I really want to ask, actually, what is thought leadership? Because I'm confused by the term. It's not a term that I hear regularly, and it's actually, to be frank, for a lot of national newspaper journalists, it's not a term that's going to play well with them. We are going to be deeply cynical about this term. I understand what it means, and everyone's been discussing it very clearly, but I would not go about suggesting that you go and tell national newspaper journalists that you're thought leaders. Can we go to the second slide? What I would say is, what national newspaper journalists, people people like me who are covering this subject in a reasonable amount of depth, but not every day, as one of many subjects in this sphere. What we're looking for is people who can explain a really difficult subject in simple terms, because that is what our audience wants. The Times' audience is it's quite widespread. It's very knowledgeable, but it won't know even basic terms in security language very well. For example, if we're going to write about a botnet, I will spend a couple of lines explaining what a botnet is. In reality, what I really want is somebody else to explain that in simple terms, in a way that people can relate to and understand. So you have to remember that even though you guys are the experts, you have a wealth of knowledge, you need to be able to put that down into everyday language that we can understand, and your sources for great amount of knowledge and data, but you have to remember that you're talking not necessarily to me, who will understand everything that you're saying, but to a much wider audience. So never forget that. If we can go to the third slide. What I think this, forgive me if I'm wrong, but what I think this this session is all about is how do you get into the media? Otherwise, why would you be speaking to me? But in my case, how do you get into the mainstream press? So I thought I'd give an example. Here's a front page story from a few months ago. I'm sure many of you are aware of it. It's the Laurie Love case. I won't speak too much about the case because it's kind of an ongoing legal case. But there was this British young guy who is being accused of by the American government of hacking into various governmental sites and databases. That story broke very late in the day from memory. It was early morning New York time, so that's about 3-4 o'clock UK time, and it's a lot of complicated information that's in the kind of it's in the document that the FBI released explaining the allegations and so on, and there's multiple things going on at this one time. It's too small to see, but there's 3 different people that are on this story. There's me, the technology reporter, who has to cover all the kind of technical elements of the story. There's a New York correspondent who's covering, who's getting information from the FBI. There's the political correspondent who is covering various governmental sides to the story from the UK. As a result of this, we're all running around trying to get various different bits of information. And what I need to know is what is the significance of this guy and what he's been accused of doing. And I I'm not going to go to, I think Tom and others have brought this out, I'm not going to go to a PR team at this point. I'm going to go to people that I know and can rely on to be able to explain everything that's happened in very, very quickly, especially if I'm able to send them the documents and do that. So I contacted a guy called Rick Ferguson, who's at Trend Micro. He's one of my go-to people who will explain this in very simple terms. He explained the seriousness and the gravity of the case and where it relates in other similar cases right down back in history, because he's able to do that, and he was able to explain it in very simple terms. And he's the guy that gets on the front page story in the Times when we decide that we're going to splash on this. And the reason why is that 2 or 3 years ago we had a drink. He's very easy to get on with and understand and talk with. But I also have his mobile number, and he's taken my phone call various different places around the world. He sometimes works in Poland. He's all around the world giving conferences. He will always answer my call. Not only that, he will always respond. Even if it's to say he's on holiday, he will make that response. And at that moment in time, I really needed a response very, very quickly, and he was there, and he was reliable. So if we go to the next slide, a lot of this is to do with being accessible. And I wanted to give some examples of being accessible. Actually, Tom in particular went through, how you can be accessible to journalists. But if you look at Sophos's press contacts page, they don't actually have these are all press contacts. You've got phone numbers and email addresses, and they used to have contacts directly to their security analysts, like Graham Cluley, who's now left the organisation. But you would be able to, they had his mobile number on the website, so they trusted their analysts and people, their experts, to be able to talk about the subject. And not worry about having to be a layer in between. I think you have to empower the experts that are in the organisations to be able to speak and not worry too much about what they're saying. I think that Adrian mentioned, being able to get kind of copy approval. I can tell you now from the Times' perspective is that we would never ever give copy approval to any quotes or anything like that. It's just not how we operate, and I know that a lot of other newspapers are like that. So you have to be willing to let go a little bit. What you should aim to do is try and get us in front of these people, and then let us build our own relationship separate to that, and that can grow organically. Sophos is a great example of that. Another guy is a guy called Mikko Hipponen, who I'm sure a lot of you know. He works for F-Secure, but if you typed in his name into Google, his what would come up is a page with his phone number, his Finnish mobile phone number, and he will also respond to all calls, and he also explains difficult things in very simple terms, and he's always accessible. And another guy is also James Line, who two people have already mentioned, and I'll be able to explain what he was able to do in the next slide, the 5th slide. So this help that you can provide, this kind of access to expertise, can go a long way. James actually, I got in contact with Sophos wanting someone to help me with a story about the dark web. Now, what you'll find a lot of the time, especially in the mainstream press, is that we're way behind the trade press in level of expertise and knowledge. Dark web stories have been around for years, but the Times has not covered this subject in any great detail for a very long time, and this was our first entry into it. This was, I think, a couple of years ago, and what we needed was somebody to be able to download Tor, go into the dark web. At the time that the Silk Road website was still up and running, go into Silk Road, find find examples of drugs and guns and things like that. There's nobody here who was comfortable doing that. We have IT experts who've been able to do it, but we didn't want to download it onto our systems, and we wanted somebody who could also talk about what they were doing at all times. James went out of his way to help us. So first of all, I called him up. He said, "Okay, I'll go and do it." He found Silk Road and a number of other marketplaces. He came down to London. He sat in our coffee shop. He listened to every kind of very basic instruction that I needed to do, and then he was steadily talking me through it. This was at the time a completely new world to me, and his pictures in that story, he's quoted throughout it. He became, our go-to person to talk about this particular topic, and it's all because, he spent a little bit of his time and effort, which was easy for him. It was really basic stuff for him to go out of his way to help us, and that we ended up with this double-page spread, which in times 2, a news story on the back of that. When Silk Road became defunct, that became a big story. Later on, we had a front-page story based on dark web about the other online marketplaces that had popped up, and that's because we'd been able to educate our audience about the subject. So this wasn't new, this wasn't weird, and also you're not just educating our audience, you're educating the editors of this newspaper. Usually they're kind of graying older blokes who still technology is a new subject for them. So you have to ease them through as well as the audience, because they are reflective of the audience in many ways. So that's what I wanted to get through to you. A few things are, making your presence felt, being able to be accessed pretty much at times that journalists want to be able to access them, and being approachable, being able to talk about this in everyday language. And you will see that it's not immediately apparent how these relationships result in stories or a bigger profile, but slowly but surely these guys all end up getting much bigger profiles. Both James and Miko have done TED Talks, and I'm pretty sure, and they've gone on to bigger, better things. Rick, I've seen, is just all over the national newspapers as a result of being accessible in this way. So if you want to get into the mainstream press, you want to be a prominent figure, those are the things you need to do.